Happy New Year and welcome to the final Irish NFL show, game preview and picks show of the 2025-2026 regular season. It is week 18. It is upon us at time of recording here on Friday night. We're just 8 days away, if you can believe it, from the first playoff games on wildcard weekend. We already know most of the teams that will be playing, but we still have a lot to sort out in week 18. Some teams are playing to secure home advantage. A couple of others are still playing to stay alive. That includes the Panthers, Bucs, Steelers and Ravens. And one or two of them are planning on losing, even though they'll never admit that, so they can improve their draft position next April. Not looking at anyone in particular, Craig Rigdon, Giants fan. Kieran O'Donovan and the aforementioned Craig Rigdon here with me, Conor Brophy, to make sense of it all. Welcome to you, Craig. Like Sean Astin in season 2 of Stranger Things, making an unexpected but delightful cameo nonetheless. Let's hope you don't get savaged by a Demogorgon like he did. That's not a spoiler, right? You can't be spoiling season 2. You should be way into it by this stage. We'll avoid any references to the controversial series finale that aired on Netflix just the other night, and we'll get to the business at hand, where we start at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida. The 7-9 Bucs host the 8-8 Panthers on Saturday night. And Kieran, the Bucs have been absolutely skidding. If they are going to get into the playoffs, they'll have slid in really through the back door. The Panthers have been up and down, but it's really advantage Carolina heading into this one, although they've been much better at home than they have been on the road. The Bucs haven't been any good anywhere over the last couple of weeks. They are 3-point favourites, though, in Raymond James.
Yeah, it's week 18. We spoke just before we came on. It's one of those weeks that really hard to make sense of the permutations, and in a lot of ways, it's a week that you're looking forward to getting over with and getting on to the business at hand. But this is one of the more interesting matchups, and this is one where it is all to play for. And I think one of the most interesting permutations here is that if the Bucs get a win, it'll be the first time in NFL history. I think I heard today that two teams can play to decide the division with neither of them having a chance to win the division in the Saints and Falcons. So that if the Bucs get a win, they're depending on a result to go their way as well. So it's an odd one to start off with. But look, just to break down the numbers, the Bucs, as you said, have been limping to the finish line. They've lost the last 7 of 8 games. The Panthers, on the other hand, have a win-loss pattern since week 7. And that bodes well for them, as they're due a win in that sense this week. Baker Mayfield has been under 20. He's been held to under 21 points in the Bucs offense in 5 of the last 6 games. And it's just the numbers are just not adding up for the Bucs at the moment. The Panthers held Sam Darnold to 147 yards and they sacked him 3 times last week. And having said all that, for one last time, I'm going to roll the dice with the Bucs this week, because I just think they backs against the wall, even though their backs have been against the wall for the last God knows how many weeks. We've listed off their talented receiving core, with Jalen McMillan to add to that pile last week, getting hot with 114 yards against the Dolphins. He's another guy that Baker can throw to, and a small chink of light in the fact that the Panthers gave up 110 yards to Zach Charbonnet last week. So if the Bucs can finally get Bucky Irving and Rashad White going, they just, again, I'll say it, and I can be proven wrong once again. They have too much talent with so much on the line to lose this game. But having said that, the Panthers have been, the Panthers defense has been excellent, but they've been so win lose. You can't trust them to win or lose at this stage. It's a coin flip game, and as I said, it sets up a Bucs win would set up a really interesting Saints Falcons game as well. So maybe once again it's me being wishful, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but I'm riding with the Bucs again one last time.
And for anybody who hasn't explored the lore on this one and doesn't understand what's at stake, so the Panthers can clinch the NFC South and a playoff berth if they win or tie, or if the Falcons beat the Saints. The Bucs can clinch with a win and a Falcons loss. So you could end up with the three-way tie, with the honey in the middle, there's some leeway at the top of the NFC South. The only deciding factor then is, as Kieran rightly said, the Falcons-Saints game, who, without either of them being in contention for the division, can decide the division. And who knows, that could be a walk-off field goal for Charlie Smith, the Irish kicker for the Saints. Imagine if that was the thing that decided this division. We'd all very much like that from an Irish perspective. It would give us a little bit of extra rooting interest. Craig, no rooting interest for any of us here tonight in this one, but this is a great game. Which way do you see it going?
I've got the Panthers, and I'm going to take the Panthers for the pure fact of what Kieran had just mentioned, in the fact that the Panthers have flip-flopped for the last 10 weeks between wins and losses, and they lost, so surely they're going to win. It's just the NFL script writing way, isn't it, that the Panthers will walk away with a W this weekend. I think both teams need to have the right mentality here, and that mentality is that the playoffs for them start now. And it almost does feel like a win and in situation, despite the fact that the Bucs need a little bit of help from Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. They've got to have the mentality that they need to do their job and move on. It almost feels like it might be the right way for both teams to approach the playoffs, because they are going to be looked on that NFC side as being the two weak links there of whichever one does get through. But, the Panthers offense has struggled. They went 1 of 11 on third down last week, and they can't do that against the Bucs because they will get taken apart. But Baker Mayfield is so hot and cold. You just never know what you're going to get with him. He had a pretty good game against the Finns, despite the fact he had 2 interceptions, over 300 yards. But against the Panthers last time, 145 yards 2 weeks ago. It's not good enough. It's not good enough for them. But I do think that the Panthers will just sneak this one out.
I got Bucs in this one, but coin flip for me, and we'll see how it pans out, and all sorts of interesting permutations with the extra, of course, kicker that this one is the Saturday evening game, so then the Falcons and Saints know exactly what's going to happen. The other team that will be interested in that one, of course, is the Rams. They're still in play for both the 5 or the 6 seed. We'll get to them a little bit later on. 6 seed would send them to either the Eagles or the Bears, depending on what way their games go. 5th seed would mean that they would play the winner of the NFC South, and I would fancy that they might think that one an easier away trip than the alternative. So we'll see how that affects their game against the Cardinals, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Sunday, early Sunday morning, the Seahawks travel to Santa Clara to play the 49ers. This one has the number 1 seed on the line. The Seahawks can, of course, clinch the NFC West if they win and get the number 1 seed and home field advantage. So a win or a tie will do that for them. The 49ers would clinch the NFC West with a win, and would they get the number 1 seed in that scenario as well? I'm getting dizzy now thinking about the permutations. I think they would. Seahawks are 1.5 point favourites on the road. I think just about justified. This is one of the best rivalries in the NFL. I love this rivalry. These two teams hate each other. And unlike, say, the Bears and Packers, where it's been horribly one-sided for the best part of 30 years, it was horribly one-sided for 20 years before then. This one has been nip and tuck the whole way. You've had great personalities involved in Pete Carroll and Kyle Shanahan for years. You've now got Mike McDonald, who's put his stamp on this Seahawks team and made them, as we've talked about several times on the show over the course of the season, the ultimate road warriors in the NFL. They will have no fear going into Santa Clara. They'll be particularly interested in trying to repeat what the Bears did last weekend and maybe going one step better than that. The Bears were able to go up and down the field on the 49ers, and that defense is going to be a huge concern from a San Francisco perspective. They haven't grappled well with the run in recent weeks. This is one thing the Seahawks, of course, do particularly well. The 49ers, of course, will be riding the hot hand of Brock Purdy. They're now 7-1 on the season when Brock Purdy starts. He has been electric the past couple of weeks. He's way too late to make any claim for MVP. Of course, that'll be decided elsewhere. But if he'd been available for the whole season, one would wonder whether he would have been in the conversation with the way he's been playing. I think the Seahawks will just about edge this one. I can see the argument for the 49ers. I just didn't like what I saw from them defensively last week. You look at their offense and you think, yeah, they can hang with anyone. But you look at their defense and think, well, that's eventually going to get them killed. It certainly will in the playoffs, and I think it will here this on Sunday morning too. Kieran.
Yeah, just to add to a couple of the points that you've already made, I tend to agree with everything you've said. Looking at a few PFF grades, Brock Purdy over the last 6 games has been the highest graded quarterback in the league. And that obviously bodes very well for San Francisco. And Christian McCaffrey has been maybe the best player in the league for quite some time. On the flip side, you mentioned their defense, and particularly the run defense, since week 9, they've been the worst.
Just as you say it, Kieran, and I think you're absolutely right. And let's give him his dues here, because Bijan Robinson has had the most phenomenal season, and he is such an electric player to watch. You've seen Harold Fallon burst out for the Cleveland Browns, and there's been a lot of exciting offensive players, even some flowers flourishing in unfertile ground like Ashton Genty in Las Vegas. Tyler Warren, of course, at the Colts had that brilliant start to the season, the rookie there as well. But because Christian McCaffrey does this year in, year out, I think he's almost been unfairly not discussed for what he's been able to do in a team that's been missing most of its star players and doesn't have, like in George Kittle being absent, you lose one of the best run blockers you have in the 49ers team and a man around who much of this outside zone scheme because Shanahan runs revolves around. Christian McCaffrey has had to shoulder such a burden throughout this season, and it's wearing on his body now. He has that back injury over the last couple of weeks, which has slowed him down a little bit. But I mean, you wouldn't notice from looking at him. He's been sensational this year.
Yeah, and it's I get to his back. It's a point I was coming to, but it's, you know, when you see the likes of Matt Stafford floundering a little bit last week and maybe damaging to his, maybe doing irreparable damages to his MVP credentials, and so many players have fallen off over the last few weeks. Fair enough, Drake May looks like a shoe-in now. Christian McCaffrey has slowly just crept into the conversation, but it looks like, you know, a little bit too late. He hasn't really been getting a lot of people haven't been clamoring for long enough. But on the flip side, you know, I was just going to mention the 49ers run defense. They've been dead last since week 9. And I talked about Zach Charbonnet last week, rattling off 110 yards. And Christian McCaffrey, to me, is the difference and the reason why I actually think the Seahawks are going to win, because the 49ers are going to depend on him. And they're going to, for the 49ers to score, they have to be methodical. It's George Kittle and it's Christian McCaffrey with the odd Ricky Pearsall and receiver cash, but they're not exactly explosive down the field. You know, they're methodical in how they go up the field and score. And the Seahawks defense is very, very opportunistic. So the more you stay on the field, the more they're hanging around. And you see a lot of those Brock Purdy touch passes that hang in the air a little bit. They're beautiful when they come off. But I think the Seahawks are going to be really, really, you know, eyeing up a pick or two and trying to win that turnover battle. And I think the real deciding factor is, as much as the prize is there to be won, and it's the biggest prize on you know, available this week in the number 1 seed and home advantage, it's not worth risking Christian McCaffrey missing the playoffs. And if he's harboring a back injury and if he's looking like, you know, he's not at 100%, it's not worth getting 1 week off if you're going to lose McCaffrey for 2 or 3. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I think Christian McCaffrey is the X factor for San Francisco, and for that reason, I think
to the point we've just been making, if it's 1 seed or 5 seed, the consolation price for 5 seed is that you go away to the winner or to the winner of the NFC South, right? Which again is not exactly a gauntlet that you're running there in comparison to other games that you could have.
No, and this is the game that nearly, you know, all these coaches who are in the playoffs now, it's the decisions that they live and die by. And then, you know, a lot of them get heavily criticized for, you know, they get criticized for resting starters and they get criticized for playing starters when they get injured. So it all depends on how it pans out. But for that reason, I think Kyle Shanahan is smart enough to be careful enough with Christian McCaffrey. And for that reason, I give the edge to the Seahawks.
Craig, call it first before we move on to Colts Texans.
Yeah, Seahawks for me as well. Just because of that 49ers defense is the Achilles heel there.
In Texas, it's a very different story for the Houston team, Craig. At Energy Stadium, they have arguably the best defense in the league. They take on the Colts. Texans still in with a chance of winning the AFC South if they win and if the Jags lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a very, very difficult debut for Riley Leonard, who is going to be under center for the Colts. He played meaningful snaps in week 14. That's the only meaningful snap all season. 18 completions, 145 yards, 1 interception. His last start was the national championship game against Ohio State. 255 yards, 2 touchdowns, 53 yards rushing. He can move. He can be a mobile quarterback. So maybe that's something that the Texans might need to keep an eye on, because there won't be a lot of tape on him doing that this season. It all depends on the play calling for the Colts. Obviously, they're going to want to see what they've got there, with Phillip Rivers being the backup on the third quarterback for the weekend. So yeah, they are going to want to have a good look at Riley Leonard, but there's a very fine line between getting the rookie killed and seeing what you've got there and maybe just moving on to next year. The Texans defense, I mean, what can you say? The Texans themselves have won 8 straight without CJ Stroud really being very good. CJ Stroud threw for 142 yards, 2 touchdowns in 2 drives last week against the Chargers, and then threw for a further 102 yards and 2 interceptions for the rest of the game. So that kind of shows you the myriad between what you're getting with CJ Stroud, where he can be phenomenal 1 second and then the next be a quarterback who doesn't look like he's on a playoff team. And that could be a worry there. They did win the Week 13 game, but Jones was under center. So you would kind of gauge that with Riley Leonard under center and with that defense, this one could be a little bit easy for the Texans. So I've got them winning this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the thing I think we're probably both going to be watching most closely is what kind of form is CJ Stroud showing us in the final tune-up opportunity that he has before the playoffs. I mean, if we'd started off the season saying the biggest question mark we'd have about the Texans would be whether CJ Stroud was going to be good enough to take them through the playoffs, I think we'd have been having rotten fruit thrown at us. But you look at every other element that the Texans are able to bring to the party, even the running game, which was a bit of a question mark. They've now found a second running back in Woody Marks, who's looked great for them and balanced up their backfield. Nico Collins is still Nico Collins. The defense, as we've talked about at all 3 levels, is just amazing. Special teams has it absolutely locked down. This Texans team is a team that probably nobody wants to play right now, and yet bizarrely, the supposed strength of the team in CJ Stroud just hasn't lived up to billing. So this is as good an opportunity as he's going to get. This is not the most difficult of tasks that they're going to have at home against the Colts, who are already done and dusted. Boy, how things changed there with that injury to Daniel Jones. Although, you can argue the toss as to whether the Colts had already passed their sell-by date when that happened, but we won't know in that sliding doors moment that robbed us of his talents until the end of the season. It's not a question of whether the Texans win or not for me. It's how they go about it and what it says for the remainder of the playoffs. Interesting to see what happens in that Jags game as well, and that will depend. That will have a lot to say about where the Texans play and how difficult their playoff route is going to be from there. Kieran?
Yeah, no, nothing to add to that. I think the Texans get home quite comfortably, and just sad to see how the Colts season just petered out so I don't know, so pitifully in the last few weeks.
Robbed us of what could have been. Sorry, Craig.
Just on that Colts thing, I read a stat earlier that I thought was very interesting. They will be the first team to start 8-2 and finish under 500 if they lose this game.
That is crazy. Yeah, I mean, what odds would you have got on that when they were 8-2? We'll rattle through a couple of the less meaningful games, given that there's nothing really at stake in these other than in the main draft pick or draft pick positioning rather. Browns at Bengals. I got Bengals in this one. Kieran?
Yeah, Bengals and Myles Garrett to get the sack record, I think.
Sorry, and we'll cover a lot of this as we go through the games. Records that you get over 17 games. Like, I'm so sick of the NFL's single season records. You can't compare 16 games to 17 games. His chance at the record is done and dusted as far as I'm concerned. He didn't get it in 16 games. Let's not reopen the case as to whether Michael Strahan got it or Brett Favre coughed it up to him. Sorry, Craig. We won't do that again. We do it to Brian every week. We'll give you a pass on that one. Craig, you're picking this one.
Bengals and Myles Garrett to break that sack record by probably two or three. I actually think they will break it by about 2 or 3, and one of those will be a lay down touch.
I'm not giving Caleb Williams the 4,000 yards first bear to pass 4,000 yards passing either if he does in 17 games, because he didn't manage to do it in 16. So I'm going to apply that across the board. I'm going to be fair in this one. Saints at Falcons. Again, we talked about how there are no stakes specifically in this game, but it has a dramatic impact on what might happen and the fate of either the Bucs or the Panthers, more particularly the Bucs than the Panthers. I have the Falcons winning this one at home. Craig, how do you see it?
I have the Saints winning it. My wife is a Saints fan. I quite like the look of Tyler Shuck and how he's been doing. I can see them knocking the Falcons off.
Kieran?
Yeah, no, as I said, I think the Bucs are going to hold up their end, but the Falcons are going to break their hearts and finish strong. Falcons.
Back with your Packers, Kieran, who travelled to Minnesota to play the Vikings. Vikings 7.5-point favourites in that one. Can the Packers upset the odds, or do they even care about it?
They shouldn't care about it. They should care about getting as many people fit and and healthy into the following week. So for that reason, I have the Vikings, and if they even dare to put a valuable player on the field and put them at risk, I'll be a very unhappy man.
It's Vikings for me as well. Craig?
I've actually gone Packers because Max Brosma did not look amazing last week, and I can see that being a turning point.
Okay, we shall see. Interesting. Right, Titans at Jaguars next. Kieran, we talked about the Texans and what their end of the equation here is. The Jags can clinch not only the division, but also the number one seed, giving them home field advantage for as long as they stay in the playoffs. They will also need Denver and New England to lose for that to happen, though. And there's a big asterisk over the Denver side of that one because the Chargers aren't playing any of their starters against the Broncos. So that could be a tall order. All the Jags can do is take care of business, though, as far as the AFC South is concerned. Will they do it at home to the Titans?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I don't think it's going to be for the number one seed, but I think they hold up their end of the bargain, and they may even cover the spread here. It's a big spread, 12.5 points. The Titans have been improving in the last month, and you've seen a lot of promise from Cam Ward. You've seen a lot of promise from an improvement in the run game through Pollard. But Cam Ward, the thing about him, he's been very boom or bust. He's been scrambling, and he's been extremely exciting to watch, and he's given us plenty of viral clips of him getting out of sacks and flying sidearm or throwing sidearm throws and completing them. The problem is that this Jacksonville secondary has been sneakily one of the best in the league, especially in the last few weeks since week 11. They're second in coverage. This is PFF again. They're first in yards per attempt and second in interceptions. So if Cam Ward is throwing any of these passes blind, they're just going to be ready to pick him off. And we've seen what's happened with Trevor Lawrence and his resurgence in the last 2 weeks. Parker Washington, Jacoby Myers, and those last two that I've mentioned, I think really opened up lanes for Brian Thomas Jr. I've mentioned this several times. I'm probably harping on about it, but Craig, when we were in London, there was absolutely nothing to love about this Jags receiving core, and even Brian Thomas Jr. coming off the field, he looked like a guy who was done and dusted. But they've been, they've been so resilient and resurgent in the last few weeks, and they've looked like an absolutely different team. And we've talked about getting Kieran this home playoff game, and I think that's going to come to fruition.
To your point on the secondary as well, a real under-the-radar move that they made at the trade deadline. They swapped Tyson Campbell, their cornerback, for Grant Newsome from the Browns. And that's why it made a big difference there to the chemistry. Grant Newsome has really balled out since he's gone to the Jags. It's one of those moves that we didn't talk about an awful lot at the time, which was a bit of a head-scratcher for some people. But the Jags obviously knew what they were doing there, and they saw something that they needed, and they moved on it at just the right time. This one, Craig, albeit that the Jags are heavily favoured at home, 13.5 is the spread there. This is a spiky little rivalry, and the Titans would love to wipe the Jags' eye here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as much as Kieran was saying about Cam Ward and his kind of boom or bust, 4 straight games, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I think that's the sign of a player who's slowly starting to see the game slow down in front of him and is actually able to try and diagnose the defenses and isn't getting too concerned. But he is going up against that Jags defense, and that Jags defense, as you said, picked up Newsome in that trade. They're actually only, I think, 1 or 2 picks behind the Bears for the most interceptions on the season. So that secondary is absolutely legit. They're holding teams to under 21 points this season, just really, really good. And the problem is on the flip side, the Titans are allowing 27 points a game and have just allowed 27 points to the Saints, who absolutely just decimated them. And Tyler Shuck threw for 333 yards in that game. Like, he just decimated that team. And they don't have a good run defense. They don't have a good passing defense. So that's kind of where Cam Ward's having to play that hero ball a little bit more than you would probably want him to do so as a rookie. But the Jags, Kieran said about, we saw them in London, they were absolutely horrendous. Since then, they're 8-1 and they're 7 straight at the moment. And their last week was week 10 against the Texans. And the Texans, we've just waxed lyrical about their defense. But Trevor Lawrence is on an absolute tear. And you talk about Christian McCaffrey. I said it on the AV Club earlier this week. I think Trevor Lawrence is my kind of sleeper MVP there. And if his second half of the season was as good as his first half of the season, he would be a shoo-in. Like, he's really turned it on and somehow become a dual threat quarterback that none of us saw coming, with his luscious locks flowing as he decides to run the ball in.
It's like a John Woo film. Remember the heroes in John Woo films always had hair that went, particularly well in slow-mo. You think of his first Hollywood movie, Jean-Claude Van Damme in Hard Target. He had that fabulous mullet.
Conor, you need to start you need to start emailing us your cultural references about 6 days before every show, because I'm gonna have to do some extra,
put in the
research.
I should have a reading, and we'll have a watch list ahead of each show. But Craig, to your point, I wonder, is there a bit of narrative fallacy bias against Trevor Lawrence, in that people have already written Lawrence off, and it's like nothing he can do will ever measure up to generational hype expectations that he had when he entered the league. But if you viewed him as another quarterback and, you know, put him up against every other candidate in that MVP race, he's got a resume that's up there with any of them.
Absolutely. And that is why I've got the Jags winning this quite comfortably, I would say. I think that spread could well be covered quite handily.
I have Jags here as well. Another quick pick game up next before we take a quick break. We have the Cowboys traveling to the Giants. I've got Cowboys in this one. Kieran?
Yeah, Cowboys.
Clean sweep for us. Clean sweep for us. I have the Cowboys, and I hope it's the Cowboys.
All right, we'll take a quick break there.